Well, this year's COP climate summit in Azerbaijan's capital Baku is focusing mainly on finance, looking at funding initiatives to curb rising temperatures. But this year's COP29 conference has some very notable absentees, including leaders from the US, China, India, Europe, and Australia. And Washington's climate envoy says the incoming president, Donald Trump, will likely reverse many policies aimed at fighting global warming. Alopi Latukefu is the Director of Justice and Advocacy at the Edmund Rice Centre, and he joins me now from Baku. Good to have you with us. Firstly, when it comes to financing, one of the aims there is to target $1 trillion annually to help especially developing countries reach their climate goals and to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees of pre-industrial levels. What's the sense there in Baku of this becoming a reality?
I think while there's a lot of energy, obviously the collection of people who are focused on these issues is bringing a lot of energy to the table. I think there's a sense of reality that this is a tough fight, and the ability to achieve the goals that have been clearly laid out by many in the developing world, but also the Pacific in particular, on the quantum of required support for things like loss and damage, but also the new targets under the MCQG, I think it's called. So are really important goals to try and achieve at least movement on.
Yeah, of course, you are from Papua New Guinea, and the Pacific is really on the front lines of the impacts of global warming with rising sea levels. But there is pessimism, and in Papua New Guinea pulled out because they were frustrated over, quote, empty promises and inaction. So is there a sense of hopelessness there?
No, I don't think there's a sense of hopelessness. I think that the PNG's decision was one that was considered carefully by every country, and I won't make comment on the reasons for why they pulled out. But I've noticed many other countries are represented here at the COP, and the Pacific sees the importance of having a presence in these important discussions. And certainly, should the COP eventually come to the Pacific, this COP in Baku will be a very important meeting leading into Australia Pacific hosted COP in 2026.
And can you give us perhaps a sense of what might be achieved in Baku this time around in terms of financing? Do you see significant improvements from the 100 billion that's currently there annually to be of use to fight global warming?
You know, I think the proof will be in the pudding in terms of negotiations. It's not looking that great in terms of, as you say, those who are present here and participating at the conference from some of the larger polluters and groups that have an interest in the broader issues around climate action, particularly in terms of defending their own economic interests. But again, the flip side of that is who covers the cost of the damage inflicted on countries like the Pacific, who have done very little in terms of contributing to the problem, but ultimately are bearing the cost of that action by the world in terms of fossil fuel use. And one of the big issues continuing to be one of importance is the phase out of fossil fuels and the need for that to be a particular focus alongside, obviously, the compensation required to those countries and those communities that will see their livelihoods and potentially their lands lost as a result of climate change.
Yeah, what's been the response, particularly from developed countries, to that fund that is required? I mean, Pacific Island nations, as you mentioned, they want that loss and damage fund to be included under the NCQG, that new collective quantified goal that's a cornerstone of the Paris Agreement. Are they going to sort of budge in that direction?
You know, I think that we're hopeful that Australia and like-minded will come to the table with a significant contribution to the loss and damage fund, and that it will be included as a sub-goal, but also that small island developing states will be a very important part of the decisions made in terms of the thinking of how to respond to this very important issue and this very important quantum of support to those countries who are facing the most impact and the existential threat of climate change at this time.
Alopi, before I let you go, there are so many leaders of the big polluting nations, as you mentioned earlier. They are absent from this conference in Baku where you are, including our Prime Minister here, Anthony Albanese. Simply, what would be your message to them if you could speak to them directly?
I think in terms of these meetings, there is a collection of humanity at these meetings that is here clearly because they know this is the most important issue facing the world now. And for those leaders who are leaders of countries around the world, you will not be avoiding the impacts of climate change, and we are seeing it across the board. And so your leadership and people like Australia and like-mindeds need to show that leadership, despite perhaps some of the changes we're seeing in other countries that may impact the world in terms of decisions made around climate change action. But countries like Australia need to step up, and I hope that our Prime Minister will take the opportunity to take a leading role, along with Chris Bowen as Climate Change Minister, and those involved in the negotiations around both action on climate change, but also support to loss and damage and other compensation.
Okay, Alopi Latukefu, really good to speak with you, and all the best in Baku. Thanks so much.
Thank you.